us
Right.
right now. Yeah, I think you'll need to remind them again to let us know. They can just put it in the chat if there's more than one watching this recording.
Well, good morning, Grove Church, and those who are joining us today. I'm Gary Knerr, the lead pastor at Grove Church. Let me open with a prayer, give you some instructions, and we'll get into today's 10:10 Faith Formation class. Let's pray. Lord, your Spirit meets us wherever we are, and so we can grow. Our spirits can be formed in you, and we thank you for this Zoom venue. We thank you for all of these professors and authors at Grove Church who have quite the story, quite the testimony to share with us. For learning from them, thank you. Be with us in this time again today, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So just a few quick instructions. We know that you are joining us, and we will not be using your names if you submit a question in the chat section down at the bottom of your screen. Also, if there is just one of you that's connected to us and watching today, that's fine. But if there are 2 or 3 of you, as there often are, would you just put in the chat that, you know, there are 2 or 3 of you. As you can see, Frank is here and his wife Sandra is in the background, so that would count as 2. And here in my office, there's 3 of us. So that's always good for attendance. You know, Methodists like to keep attendance, and Pastor Eva cares for that for us. So that would be helpful. All right, so enough for the preliminaries, and a welcome to Frank Harrelson. He is yet another math major and mathematician here at Grove Church. We have so many people like that. He is a lifelong Methodist. His work has been accomplished in the skies, in outer space, and under the sea. So boy, you can take a math degree just about anywhere, right? The C-5A, which is the world's largest cargo plane that the Air Force uses, that was one of the projects he's worked on. He's consulted with Johns Hopkins University and Hospital and the United States Public Health Service, which no one ever heard about until now. They're in the news all the time because of COVID-19. So that's a little bit about Frank, a thumbnail sketch. We're going to let him talk a lot more. And welcome to you, Frank Harrelson.
Thank you.
So talk to us about a little bit about your life and growing up and all the background information that most of us don't know because you're fairly new to Grove.
Well, I was born in 1940, and just, I guess, as the Second World War was beginning. And I was born in a pretty small, in a pretty small town in South Carolina. And my father had served in World War I, and of course was a veteran. And we moved to North Charleston, South Carolina, for him to work in the naval shipyard. And so I went through 3rd grade in North Charleston, and then the war was over, and he had heart trouble, very bad, from the fact that he suffered from being gassed in World War I and lost a lung. So it made it rather difficult. So my parents decided to move back to where I was born. And I went through fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh grade there. And that was up near Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And then his heart condition got so bad that decided that we should move back to Charleston where he could get really good medical care. And we did in August of 1953. And 2 weeks later, he passed away. And so I continued through high school in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, and finished high school in 1958. I missed my father very much, and but you know, what happens is what happens. And I pretty much excelled in high school. And when I graduated, I got a scholarship to college from the Western Electric Company. And I went to Auburn University in Alabama and majored in math. And then while I was there, I took Naval ROTC. And that was probably the most honorable thing that I have ever done in my life. And when I graduated in 1962, I was commissioned into the Navy and served on an aircraft carrier for several years. And when I was released from active duty, I got out a little bit early. But I asked the Bureau of Naval Personnel if I could get out early to go to graduate school. And that was granted. So I got out a week before the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And I went to Clemson University and studied industrial management and statistics and operations research. And upon receiving my master's degree at Clemson in 1965, December of 1965, I went to work right away for Lockheed, Georgia in Atlanta, or just outside of Atlanta. met my wife, Sandra, and we got married in July of 1966. And in fact, we got a wedding anniversary coming up very soon. And I stayed with Lockheed working as primarily as a statistician for a year and a half. And then I wanted to move on, and I went to work for Westinghouse Underseas Division in Baltimore, Maryland, which was very short-lived because they'd already built the torpedo that they had a contract to develop. But unfortunately, they didn't have very much for me to do. But in any event, I had no part in building the torpedo, but when they had a fire-off in competition with TRW, the Westinghouse torpedo. It was in Puget Sound in Washington State. And the torpedo was shot at an old abandoned ship with the purpose of sinking it, but instead it turned around and came back at the submarine that fired it. So that was the end of the underwater experience. And I had nothing to do with the building of that torpedo. But
Good Methodist, thank you.
yeah, so anyhow, they transferred me to Westinghouse Defense Center in Baltimore that had brought down an advanced study group from MIT, and we were working on a contract for the Army, Navy, Air Force, and the Marines for a communication satellite system. And it was for the US and for 3 other countries. And when that contract ran out of money, the Army said, can't refund it until next fiscal year. I got transferred to the healthcare division of Westinghouse. And that's where I did consulting work for Johns Hopkins and for the pediatric department at Johns Hopkins. And then I guess I wrote a paper for the Journal of American Public Health, and I was a little bit critical of Johns Hopkins. So my supervisor seemed to take it out on me that, that I was interfering with our source of revenue. And I knew the handwriting was on the wall. So I got a job with the U.S. Public Health Service up in Philadelphia. And I resigned and moved to Cherry Hill and worked at in Philadelphia for the U.S. Public Health Service. And I retired from it in 1997. My work there was as a loan officer for acute care hospitals under the auspices of HUD, although I got paid by the Public Health Service. Well, got paid by HUD actually, but through the Public Health Service. And so I retired in 1997, and we moved to where did we move to here?
Lexington area, Virginia.
To the Lexington area of Virginia. And that's when I got really active in genealogy and DAR and what have you. And then we moved.
Let me just interject a minute, Frank, for the people who don't know, DAR is the Daughters of the American Revolution.
No, I got involved with SAR.
Oh, SAR.
Sons of the American Revolution.
Okay, all right.
And
I'm glad we clarified that.
Yes, I am too.
I didn't know if you were doing some consulting for the DIR, but it's the SAR.
No, I just was a member of the SAR, and I wanted to be a member of the Huguenot Society of South Carolina because I'd already established to get into SAR. I had to establish that one of my ancestors had served in the war with England, which I was able to do. So I got me into SAR, and then I thought, oh, gee, I'd like to be a member of the Huguenot Society of South Carolina.
Frank, if I could interrupt, you're getting a little quieter and a little farther away from the mic.
Okay.
If you could get a little, there you go, much better. Thank you.
So anyhow, I traced my ancestry back to my 9th great grandfather from La Rochelle, France. His name was in the book, one of the real characters in the book, Daniel Orry. Yes. And his father, I found out, we are members, associate members of the French Huguenot Church in Charleston. So attending services there one Sunday when we were visiting Charleston, I saw on the wall of the church a granite plaque about my 10th great grandfather, Jean Orry, and he was an elder in the Reformed Church of Paris. And then the article, my book sort of picks up with some made up characters, but based on historical novel, on historical fact. I take readers through a novel that about the Reformation begun by Martin Luther and picked up by John Calvin, or Jean Calvin, who was a French priest. Martin Luther was a German priest, of course. And once that the 95 Theses of Martin Luther was posted on the door of his church in Wittenberg, Germany, the Reformation started and spread like wildfire throughout Europe, especially France. And so my story centers around the Huguenot and La Rochelle, France, and in other parts of France too. And
So Huguenot is the name for French Protestants then?
Right.
Right.
Or as one of my neighbors calls it, a Protestant.
Right, yes.
So anyhow, the whole story centers around the fact of that there were people that, because France at one time was all Catholic. And so there were members of the Catholic Church that for various reasons wanted to leave the Catholic Church and worship with freedom of worship rather than through the Pope. They wanted a personal God to pray to and to believe in. And the Catholic Church had a stranglehold on the government of France, and so it became sort of forbidden. And the kings of France, with the exception of, well, most of them were sort of standoff on punishment, but for the Huguenots, and in fact, some granted them a lot of freedom. And the Huguenots were the business class, the middle class of France, except in Paris. And they were the writers, the artistic people, the painters, the composers, and the French business people. And it was a large part of the number of people in France. Many of them worshipped in privacy and in secrecy. My book describes that. And it got down to King Henry IV, who grew up as a Protestant. Mother was strictly Catholic, and he is the person who passed the Edict of Nantes that provided great freedoms for the Huguenots and let them worship in church of their choice.
So France was the largest power, most noteworthy power at the time.
Well, it's in the golden age of France.
Right. The Reformation was in 1517. What year were you writing about with your answer?
I picked it up. Well, actually, I picked it up with Martin Luther, I think, in 1531.
Right.
And carried it on from there and picked up on my novel part of the story in like 1560 or 1562, somewhere in there. And it was agonizing story. It took me 10 years to do the research on the history of the Huguenots and to write the book. And I felt that I had to write it because I think God told me to write it. And that it was a story that had to be told. History is history. It can't be changed. And
you really did pick up a stream that is largely ignored. I mean, I love history, but the story of the Huguenots is not a well-documented one. So, presenting that history in an entertaining, literally novel kind of way with the love stories that you did is truly helpful to getting the word out. I want to talk about the love stories, plural, in a minute, but I'd like to hear from you a little bit about the persecution, perhaps not getting quite as graphic as the novel does. It was uncomfortable, and I talked to some folks at Grove who read it. It was uncomfortable reading, but as you said, necessary to get this story out. So tell us a little bit about the persecution and how long it lasted and how it was accomplished in France and what that even meant eventually for what became the United States.
well, people who wanted to have personal freedom of worship,
Right.
That wanted to leave the Catholic Church, and they were pretty much forbidden to do so. To leave, you had to pledge a tithe to the Catholic Church, a monthly tithe, and even though you didn't attend, and you were not supposed to meet in secrecy, but that was the only opportunity that they had. And they began by meeting at night in people's homes to worship. And, the number of Huguenots grew and grew and grew. And the Catholic Church was suffering from finances. as if they didn't have enough money to begin with.
But I thought you said they could worship as Huguenots, but they still had to pay the tithe. Were they not paying that tithe?
Oh yeah, you had to,
Right.
but you didn't have to go to church.
Okay.
Talk about the siege of La Rochelle, because that's
And
persecution. The siege of La Rochelle.
I know what you're talking.
Okay.
So anyhow, they, that was the way that it continued, and they kept being persecuted. The merchants, stores were burned down, crops were burned, what have you. So La Rochelle was really beginning to suffer. And it was around 1678, I think, that the cardinal, a Catholic cardinal who was the chief advisor to Louis the 13th, pretty much decided on its own that the Huguenots had to be wiped out totally in France, and that be given the chance to convert back to Catholicism or not to convert. If you didn't convert, you could be arrested, you could be executed, you could be sent off to slavery in some French-controlled land. And he launched a siege of La Rochelle, and the population of La Rochelle was reduced from about 45,000 people to about 5,000 people.
And this was a town along the coast, so there was a lot of merchant marine activity, which was greatly affected by that siege of La Rochelle. Correct?
That's correct.
So I'm curious how I thought you did a masterful job of weaving those horrid stories of persecution in with the love stories, and even brought some redemption to some of the torturous deaths that occurred. Could you move the conversation now from a little of the persecution to how you wove that into the love stories that were in part your own family history?
That's correct. Some of the made-up characters were, the Catholic police and what have you.
How about Thomas?
Honey.
Okay. Tell him about Thomas.
So anyhow, the Horry family was a historical name in a town not far from La Rochelle. And so anyhow, one of the first characters in the book was young man that was his name was Thomas, and that's where the first love story began, where people were meeting in secret, and he was dating. Use of a common term for these days, dating a French woman, that a young woman, and he'd been sexually abused as in the Catholic Church by the priest and what have you. But anyhow, they got married and went on a honeymoon, and coming back to La Rochelle, there's a lot of history that could have happened around that. And then as people got married, had children, and they grew up and got married, it all led into the Orrery line. And
that was your direct line family?
yes. Yeah.
Okay. And how do you spell that?
H-O-R, well, then it was H-O-R-I, Orrery, but it became Orrery. And I found out first that Daniel Orrery, who was born on an island just off the coast of La Rochelle and grew up there, that he had become involved with the shipping industry and the Navy and what have you, so that in 1684, when King Louis XIV revoked the Edict of Nantes, he forbid people to leave France, although many did. And there was already about several 100,000 that had left before that and had gone to Amsterdam. And so he got passage somehow to go to Amsterdam, and was there for several years.
And that's where your book ends.
And that's pretty much where my book ends. But he was there for a couple of years. And then when the Edict of Nantes was revoked, he went to England and for a period of time, and then he came to this country and came into Charlestown in 1692 and was granted, because he was a Huguenot coming from England, the King of England granted land in South Carolina, pretty much in Charleston and along the Santee River up near Georgetown, to Huguenots that came from England to South Carolina. And that's how he got here. And in the meantime, though, when Edict of Nantes was revoked, totally revoked, and you were told you had to be Catholic, his father refused to convert as an elder in the Reformed Church. He refused to convert back to Catholicism. And he was imprisoned and tortured and died in prison. So, you know, for me, this book has been was a faith journey. I thought about quitting it, shutting it down many times, but God always told me to finish the book. Finish the book. So that's what I did.
So can you tell us a little bit about, you know, matters of the heart in terms of how your faith was really impacted by your research and the book and getting to know these family members that you had never known before. Talk a little bit about that faith development, please.
Well, just knowing learning through research of the persecution that the Huguenots went through, and what happened in La Rochelle, the siege of La Rochelle, and how many people were killed simply for their faith.
Well, starved to death.
And are starved to death, or just executed. It made me feel really sad for them. And then finding out that Daniel's father was arrested for his faith and his taking part in a non-Catholic church, that he was executed for that, and or put in prison and then executed. It just seemed terrible to me. And I thought about what Hitler did to the Jews in World War II, and that was certainly a tragic affair. But then I thought, nobody knows about what happened to the people in France who wanted to leave the Catholic Church and did. And
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, this area is known for largely two groups, the English and the Germans. The English, of course, William Penn founded this colony as his father was granted this land by the King of England, and it was found along freedom of religion kind of principles. And so it attracted German-speaking people, Anabaptists, we now call them Mennonites and Amish, who came to this area. A lot of the English, who were English Protestants, settled in this area for the same reason, largely the Quakers. But we're not told about the French, and some of their last names are prominent in this area as well. Dibert, de Turk, or the two biggest ones, we pronounce them Moyer and Boyer. Big names in this area. They would pronounce them Moyer and Boyer. Perhaps some of our folks remember Charles Boyer, the actor from decades past. But a huge presence here in Southeast Pennsylvania, but largely unrecognized, but again, from the Protestant persecution.
Well, there are millions of people in this country today that are descended from the Huguenots. Some
Yes.
very famous people. George Washington was a Huguenot. Francis Marion was a Huguenot. The list goes on and on. Admiral, I can't remember his name, a French admiral that had come from France. He was a Huguenot. And so, the history goes way back.
Mm-hmm. So before we finish, Frank, I want to open this up and see if there are any questions that people have for you about the book, about Huguenots, about yourself. And while if people are formulating those questions, I just want to note that you still have relatives in France, a daughter and a grandson, Melvin, to whom you dedicated the book. They are in Paris, if I recall correctly.
That's right. We were going to see them this coming month when we go down to Charleston. But unfortunately, she cannot come because France says she can come over, but she can't go back. Melvin can go back because he has a French passport. She can't go back because she doesn't have a French passport.
And you told me both of them suffered from COVID-19, but
yes,
not seriously ill and recovered quite nicely.
Right, yes. But right now, France is shutting down its borders. Americans from the U.S. cannot enter France.
Right.
If I could interject, he has a couple of these space stories in the book, the
Right.
things that happened to him personally.
Yeah, the beginning of the book really sets the historical stage, so you know what's happening. Just like if you go to a play, there's a little bit in the beginning to set what's going on, and we get into the novel itself, and at the end, some of the and documents that are referred to in the body of the novel are explained, and some of that personal history is there too. So we are really at the end of our time, but I want to give Frank the final word. Is there anything you'd like to, in particular, to say to those who are participating in today's class? Please tell us now.
Well, believe in God, of course. Respect other people, and let's work to get over this COVID-19 virus.
Very good. Well, Frank, thank you for taking the time to not only write this novel, but spend it with us today. It was a great opportunity for many of us to get to know you for the first time. Again, I'm going to hold up the book. I don't own any stock in the company, but do want to promote that. And you can get it online. You can go to Barnes & Noble, where I know he's done some book signings. It's a good read. It's a quick read. It's an engaging novel. Whether you like history or love stories, you're going to be pleased on both fronts.
It's 150 pages.
It is a long novel, yeah, no question. But like I said, it reads quickly. It's not heavy, slow reading with like a philosophy or theology text. Also, I would just want to invite everybody back next week to the 1010 Faith Formation Hour. Dr. Leah Ndanga, a professor at Westchester, will be joining us. It's a nice, rather interesting placement. Today we have Frank, who at the end of his working career became a new author. Next week, Leah is at the beginning of her career and brings all of the youth and excitement that one would expect. So we invite you back next week. Don't forget, you got to register by Wednesday. And thanks again to Frank for spending time with us, and for all of you who've been expressing your thanks. We appreciate those encouragements. We're going to sign off, and we'll see some of you at the 11:15 Arise worship service, and the rest of you we will see next week. God bless. Good seeing you also, Sandra.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to give you a call soon.
Thank you.
Give him a call. Why?